See, that's what I've been thinking. Robin and Arrowette and Spoiler and all, they know why they're doing this. They know who the villains are. And I don't know if I can do that. Not yet, at least. But there is something that I want to change.
By all indications, World Without Grown-Ups led directly into the ongoing series, but before that we're going to cover one more thing. Secret Origins 80-Page Giant number 1 was released in December at the very end of 1998. It technically takes place sometime after the first 3 issues of the ongoing series, but we're going to talk about half of it here because its purpose is to clue new readers into the, well, origins of our heroes. I figure anyone who's not familiar with these kids might have some questions, especially if you only know their cartoon versions. First up is Impulse, aka Bartholomew Allen II. Bart comes from the 30th century because his grandfather, the Silver Age Flash, lived there for a time with his wife Iris before his death in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Iris stayed in the far future and bore twins, one of whom went on to father Bart. Bart inherited his family's super speed pretty much from birth, but he couldn't control it, leading him to live and age at a hyper-accelerated rate. So he's only been alive for 3 years, but he's technically 15. The only way he could live a semi-normal life was through virtual reality, which is where he spent most of his childhood. When it became clear that this would eventually kill him, Iris brought him back to the 20th century so his cousin Wally, the third Flash, could snap him out of it. He was then put under the supervision of Max Mercury, the Zen Master of Speed, because Wally, quote, doesn't do sidekicks. Max would then act as pretty much the best father figure and mentor the kid would ever have. What sets Bart apart from his friends is that, unlike the other boys, he's 100% genuine. As we'll discuss in a moment, Robin and Superboy start off the comic with a lot of, for lack of a better term, fronting, i.e. they both cultivate exaggerated personas in an attempt to project a certain image to their peers. Which is an incredibly teenager thing to do. It's why literally all of us have embarrassing memories of our school years. But Bart doesn't front. That's what makes him hard for some people to deal with. Most kids who act the way that Bart does are assumed to be putting on an act for attention. This is not always the case, especially if they're on the autism spectrum, but that's what's most often assumed. Bart is not autistic, not officially anyway. But the circumstances of his upbringing have a similar effect, right down to his inability to maintain any kind of persona. He even has trouble concealing his secret identity, and a big part of his solo comic involves Max trying to convince him that he can't be Impulse all the time and should desire some measure of a normal life. Which, interestingly, means that while the others see Young Justice as a place to be a bit more like regular kids while still embracing their superhero identities, for Bart, it's where he can let loose and be exactly the sort of Impulse that he wants to be, instead of his well-meaning mentors trying to guilt him into some more restrained behavior. As such, his growth as a character is mostly provoked from the outside, which makes it a little hard to foreshadow without spoiling. Suffice it to say that as cartoony and down for chaos as he is, he's eventually forced to confront realities that he's not really equipped to deal with, and he has to grow as a person to move past them, including learning how to better connect with other people. And I know that sounds really vague, but it's mostly because his more serious story turns come later in the series. Early on, with the exception of a few weird power hiccups, he acts more as a comedic force of nature that the others react to, with glimmers of cleverness in the heat of battle that lay the groundwork for the things later on. Next is Superboy. Superboy is not Kryptonian. Not even a little. DC had this policy at the time where only Superman, as the last son of Krypton, was allowed to have even a trace of Kryptonian DNA. So, even though Superboy was a clone designed to take Superman's place in the event of his death, he was actually completely human, and he'd been genetically modified to... Hey, wait a minute! If he's not Kryptonian, why would he be affected by kryptonite? And he is! He definitely is! That's why Little Metallo was such a threat. Plus, I'm pretty sure that Tim clocked him with a kryptonite ring during their first team-up. Motherfuck, am I gonna have to go through Reign of the Supermen now too? The research for this project, I swear. Okay, so... apparently the fight with Robin was the first time Superboy had ever been exposed to kryptonite, and that's when he finds out that his human DNA has been modified so much that he does have a weakness to it. Not that it kills him, it just makes him weak and violently ill. None of this is in Secret Origins, by the way. It was just gonna bug me until I figured it out. Anyway, Superboy is a human clone genetically engineered to mimic most of Superman's abilities primarily through his own unique power, tactile telekinesis. Basically, the ability to psychically manipulate anything with a physical mass, including himself. He was created by Project Cadmus, specifically their very corrupt director, to take Superman's place after his death, but was freed ahead of schedule by a group called the Newsboy Legion, who are apparently also clones? Comics are weird. By the time Young Justice gets together, he's spent several years living it up in Hawaii as a superhero celebrity, but recently had gone back to working with Cadmus, now thankfully under new management. And, at some point during his 5-year career, he contracted a disease that only targets clones, one of several he'd suffered during his life, and the resulting procedure to save his life stuck him at 16 years old, apparently forever. Like I said before, the thing to remember with the kid is that a lot of his posturing is just an act. Yes, he is genuinely confident to the point of arrogance and an incorrigible flirt and competitive with the other boys, and prone to both bragging about and showing off his array of awesome powers, especially the tactile telekinesis. But he's just as often caught out, startled into dropping the act and revealing the sincere, awkward, uncertain teenager underneath. And as time goes on, his act starts to lighten up around his teammates. Like, when the girls are first introduced, he spends a few issues brazenly flirting, only to drop it almost completely by the time the team gets fully settled. In that way, he's like a lot of teenage boys, acting out a form of aggressive masculinity that they've been sold by culture in the media because that's what they believe they're supposed to be. It's only worsened by the fact that Superboy is a literal manufactured pop star, designed to be the hip young Superman for the 90s. And as the series begins, that's all he has. Unlike Impulse, no one has ever pushed him into having a normal teenage life. He's got no secret identity, no real private life, no future to plan for, not even a name. The issue of his solo series, where Superman gives him the Kryptonian name Kon-el, didn't come out until a full 5 months into Young Justice's run. And that's where his story lies, figuring out an identity for himself beyond what was designed for him. In a sense, he doesn't just want to be Superboy, he wants to be a real boy, with a real name and an identity beyond his powers. And this is partially because he's still 100% on board with someday growing up to be the real Superman, assuming he ever gets to grow up at all. Because, as he's gradually starting to understand, even Superman isn't Superman all the time, and he doesn't have to do it alone. Last for this video, but certainly not least, we have the third Robin, Tim Drake. Tim is my favorite superhero, ever, and he's one of my favorite characters of all time. I am trying so hard not to be biased. Tim's story starts where Robin's does, with the death of Dick Grayson's parents. Tim was in the audience, saw Batman lead Dick away, and developed a bit of an obsession. After collecting clippings and photos for years, he figured out Robin's identity based on some news footage, and from there ID'd Batman. Following the death of the second Robin, Jason Todd, he became convinced that Batman needed a Robin to keep him stable, and tried to convince Dick to resume the role. When Dick refused, Tim stole the suit to help in a case and convinced Bruce to take him on. He went through months of training and even the death of his mother before at last earning his wings by helping Bruce out against the Scarecrow. I haven't been talking about the framing stories around these origins, but I really like that Robbins has him hanging out in Nightwing's apartment doing the brother thing. It's cute, and also ties into the major ongoing themes of legacy and family. Another fun detail? These mini-stories are presented as part of a larger framing story in which Secret arrives at Mount Justice and talks with Red Tornado about how other young heroes are getting by in the world. And the last page of each origin includes a wisp of smoke or steam implied to be Secret observing the various events. It's a nice touch. I've heard a lot of people claim that Tim in particular is out of character in YJ, since he appears as mostly a normal guy in his solo title, but is often characterized in the team book as a junior Batman. But I firmly reject that opinion as misinformed, and here's why. Just like with Superboy, the persona of Robin is clearly an act, and one that his friends regularly call him out on. You can't go more than an issue or two without gags like, well, I can tell you were trained by the world's greatest detective, or arguments spawned from his use of the act to keep an emotional distance. And it's not like this came out of nowhere. His solo title makes it very clear that Tim actively tries to act like Batman while in costume, and even practices his Robin persona when he's alone to maintain it. But that series is told almost entirely from Tim's perspective, often complete with interior monologue, and thus every moment of uncertainty, goofiness, and fucking up is on full display. Those same kind of scenes come back in Young Justice all the time, it just doesn't get the same kind of focus in a team book's unique, limited third-person plural point of view. Likewise, at around this same time, Tim would appear in books like Birds of Prey, Nightwing, Catwoman, and even some Batman storylines as more childish and vulnerable, because all of those books were told from the perspective of older heroes who view him as a surrogate son, a younger brother, or a child to be protected. It's one of the things that's really great and interesting about expanded universes, getting to see these characters from multiple perspectives that offer unmatched opportunity for nuance and depth. Moreover, recognizing that Robin, master detective and protege of the Batman, is an act, and a deliberate one, is vital to understanding Tim's character within the pages of YJ. The word of the day is compartmentalization, which is a thing that Tim has to do to keep his double lives as separate as possible. It's always been a facet of his character, but Young Justice is where it gets strained to the breaking point. Everyone else on the team is very open about their secret identities, about hanging out in their civilian clothes, or visiting each other's houses and bitching about their parents. Tim isn't allowed to be part of that camaraderie, isn't even allowed to tell them his first name or show them his face, nor can he go home and tell his dad about all the fun he's had with his friends. That's incredibly isolating, and it clearly weighs on him as much as it strains his relationships with the others. This is actually one of the few elements that the animated series tried to incorporate, but it doesn't work as well there because the team is more of a professional setting where there's an expectation of distance, and also literally everyone except Kid Flash is keeping a more dangerous secret of their own. Whereas with Tim, it's a real issue with the expectations of his mentor getting in the way of the friendship that he wants for himself, which, in a way, is the same struggle faced by the others. Finding a balance between what authority figures expect of you, what you expect for yourself, and reality is a fundamental part of growing up. And the first step in doing that is in claiming the space you need to explore and understand things for yourself. The Supergiant also includes an origin for Robin's then-girlfriend's spoiler, for some reason. I think at some point in the book's development she might have been intended to join the team, but at the time that this was all coming together, she was actually retiring. Because she was pregnant. And no, Robin was not the father. She had an asshole ex-boyfriend that she eventually punched. She'd get back in the game later on, but that's way down the line. There's 2 other origins in this book, but we'll be saving those for the one where the girls finally show up. For now, we've got our trio, we've got our headquarters, and when you hear from me again, we'll kick things off by finally getting our team name as the ongoing adventures of Young Justice begin.